And hello and welcome. My name is Martin, and today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating what I like to call a homing missile enemy. Basically, what this enemy is going to do is the second that you walk into what's called a navigational mesh, it will detect you and come flying directly at you. And of course, we're going to leave the explosion sprite from the barrel dynamite thing the stationary mine that we set up before. So we're going to have it explode also. So technically, this thing is going to not move until you walk into the mesh. You can see that I have a navigational mesh right here, and we'll explain what that is in just a moment. I do need to have it up so then that way I can give you the example. So let me go ahead and push play. And you're going to see that my character is standing outside of the mesh, and so nothing is happening. Now, the second that I do walk into the mesh, you'll see that both of them do come towards me, and they obviously do explode. Now, they also are respawning. So obviously what happened there is it's both being affected by myself, the character, which is labeled as a pawn, and also by what is labeled as a projectile. Okay, so let's figure out how we're going to do this. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to go back to our folder, which is a enemy, and we're going to create a new folder next to smine, not inside, but next to. So let's right click, create new folder, and let's call this H missile or homing missile. Okay. Once you're there, what we want to do is go into smine where we have the barrel mine. Let's go ahead and click that, right click on it, and then duplicate. Okay, and let's go ahead and call it H missile. Okay, so now we have two of them. And what we want to do is we want to grab this H missile and we want to move it into the next folder, which is H missile. Now, if you're not seeing this over here on the side, don't worry about there. There is actually a little icon here that says show or hide sources panel. So if you click that, that then opens up this area. And once that area is open, it makes this very easy to just drag over there. Now, because things are attached to this, because code is attached to this, and because you may have a piece of it here, and then your AI is sitting in another folder, and your mesh is sitting in another folder. So because of that, they ask you, are you moving this? Are you copying it? We are technically moving it, so we are removing it from the folder that it was and moving it into this next folder. I'd love to say you can just click and drag without that popping up, but most everything makes that pop up because it wants to ensure that when you move something that it goes and looks through the code and makes sure that everything ends up being okay when you move that object. That you don't get something that's called missing media or missing files. Whoops. Okay, so now let's go into that folder. So I'm going one level out in content. I'm going to go into the new folder that we just created called H missile, and I'm going to go ahead and double click on this. Now, we did copy it, and that's great, but there is still something that is not correct with the code that we have right now. So we did save ourselves some time in not having to rewrite this code or by copying and pasting it, but the problem that we have is going to be the variable. So this variable that we created over here is called explosion, and it's also called explosion inside of the stationary mine. So even though these are going to be in different pawns, you still need to give it a unique name. And I think that the best way to do this is to go ahead and delete all of this and go ahead and delete the variable. So I'm right clicking and deleting the variable, and I'm going to now create a new variable and recreate that part of the code. So let's go ahead and pull out. We need to promote it to a variable. Let's go ahead and call this, explosion 2. Explosion 2, that's now a unique name. With that object or with the variable selected, go into the details panel, scroll all the way down to the bottom where it says on destroyed, click that. It now has created one, a unique one. You can see now that says explosion 2. Okay, once that's there, we're going to click and drag out and type in destroy. And we need actor. Okay, and before you leave there, just make sure that that's connected. All right, so technically this should work now. We should be able to create an explosion or put this out on the floor and create an explosion. Now, the thing that we don't have is movement towards the character. So the way that we're going to do it with this, let me go ahead and just hit compile and save so that that's then done, is that we need to create what's called an AI controller and then attach that to this blueprint. So to create an AI, oh, and you know what? Let's go ahead and change the barrel. Let's see what kind of other interesting things we can get into. You know what? We'll go with this. Okay, so I found something here called SM Glowstick 2. So let's go ahead and click that and put it in. This is going to have a somewhat missile-esque shape to it. And then the other thing, obviously, I want to do is find the material for that. So I think it was Glowstick. Okay. And I don't know, let's try that one. Okay, so let's see what that looks like. Let's hit compile and save. And now we have something that would look more like a missile. Okay, so at this point what we need to do is we need to create the AI portion of this, and the AI portion is going to create the movement. It's going to tell this this blueprint how to move. So in order to do that, we're going to right click in the area next to the H missile that we just modified. We're going to go again underneath blueprint class, and here we're going to type in AI underneath all classes, because the thing that we're looking for is not up here. So if we do that, we see that we get anything that has the word AI in it, and underneath controller, underneath AI controller, we actually want to select this. We don't want to select any of the presets that are there. We want to select AI controller. Once we've got that selected, you're going to hover and make sure that that's selected, and then hit select. Once that has been created, let's go ahead and rename it. So we'll call this H missile. Whoops. Okay. So let's rename that. And let's call this H missile AI. Okay. So now that we have that, when we look at this, the icon that's generated for the, just so that way you can see it, the icon that's there kind of looks like what would be considered like a brain with a body underneath it. So AIs are going to have this kind of look to them, where like the pawns actually look like a chess piece pawn. All right, so once we have that there, let's go ahead and double click and open it. Inside we should see nothing. We should have nothing inside the event graph, and we should have nothing inside the viewport. Now we don't need to see anything inside the viewport because we're going to be using this as a controller for other things, so it doesn't have a physical shape. It's more or less the brain, and we don't see the brain in objects. So let's go scoot over here to event graph. Now there we're going to erase the event tick because we're not going to use that one, but we are going to use the event begin. We can just delete it, right click, and then look for it in case you deleted it. So just type in event begin, and you'll see one called event begin play. Now once we have that there, essentially what we want to have the AI do is constantly keep looking for us, right? So we need to set a timer and a time that every 5 seconds or every 1 second or every half a second it's looking for us. So then that way it keeps correcting itself and keeps looking for us, the main character, or the player character. So what we need to do is drag off of this and type in set time. And there's going to be two options here underneath time. One is set timer by event, and the other one is set timer by function name. So we're going to type this in by function name because we're going to need to recall that function in a little bit and then tell it which direction to go. So this piece of the code is going to be saying, keep looking for us. So when we zoom in a little bit and see what we've got, the first thing is going to be the object. We don't need to do anything with that right now. What we do want to do is go underneath function name, and let's type this in as follow player. Now, at this point, there is no function or no event called follow player in the presets inside the engine. So with this, what we're going to need to do is create a custom event and name it follow player. So then that way this will work. Now we'll do that in a moment. Let's go ahead and finish with the other things that we need here. Now underneath time, if I type in 1.0, what this is signifying is time in seconds. If you hover over it, you'll actually see that it delegates time in seconds. So anything over 0 would be 1 second. Anything below 0 would be less than that. So if I have 0.5, that's half a second. If it's 1.0, it's 1 second. If I put in there 30, it would be half a second. 60, 1 minute. So you understand how that's working, right? You're counting seconds and time. The other thing we also want to do is we want to make sure that looping is turned on, because we don't want this to be a one-time event. We want this to continue to keep happening. If we don't have this clicked on, then it's going to look for us once and then it's going to stop. It's not going to continue looking for us. From there, the next thing we want to do is we want to create this new custom folder and actually create the moving towards us effect. So we're going to right click in the space on the event graph, and let's type in custom. And the first thing up there at the top is add custom event, and that is what we're looking for. Now, because it's a custom event, it's going to come in with the default name custom event. Let's go ahead and replace that and type in follow player. And you want to make absolutely sure that you don't add like spaces, or that you have this spelled exactly the same way with exactly the same attention to what's been uppercased and lowercased. So then that way it matches what's up in here. If these two names don't match, guess what? It's not going to find the custom event. So now that we have the custom event there, we need to drag this out and type in AI. And we're looking for one called AI move to. Okay, so this is the function that's going to generate the actual motion. So when we look at it, it's saying pawn, what is it that's going to be moved? Where is it moving to? What is the target of the move? And how far away is there an acceptable radiance of how close it can get to the object that you're trying to get to? And then whether it stops on the overlap, like as soon as it starts to overlap something, it stops its moving, so that it doesn't continue trying to move through the object, right? So it gets to you and stops. Okay, so the two things that we need to add here is we need to tell it that we want it to actually control the pawn that is being told to control it, and we'll see that in a minute where we go into the blueprint for the missile itself, the one that's got the mesh, and we're going to attach that to this, so that'll be the attached pawn. So we're going to type in here get controlled pawn. Okay. And so this will be any pawn that is using this MH missile AI as its controller. And then the next thing we need to do is get player character. And if I'm not mistaken, yep. So get player character. And what that's going to do is it's going to make sure that it goes in the direction of the player itself. I'm going to leave the acceptance radiance at 5. We'll play around with that in a little bit, but let's see now if this is going to work. So let's go ahead and hit compile and save. And once that's done, we need to go back to H missile, because if we don't attach the AI, it's not going to know how to move. So I'm going to go up here to H missile self. You have to go to the. It's not going to be. You're not going to find it in the mesh, and you're not going to find it in the default scene run. You actually have to go up to the self, up at the top, the blueprint itself. And from there, you'll see underneath at the very top, the second one down is called pawn, and at the very last option down there is AI controller class. Now, if we click there, we'll see that right now it's defaulted to AI controller, but we actually wanted to go to the one that we just created, which was H missile AI. So that's the one that I'm going to connect it to. And so now this pawn, this blueprint, will be controlled by the AI that we just created. Okay, so before we actually go and put one of these out on the gameplay area and test it out, there is one more thing that we have to actually do for this. Even though we have an AI controller and we've told the AI controller that it needs to move towards the player and that it's going to be moving the pawn towards the projectile or the cube mesh towards the player, anything that's being controlled by that AI towards the player, we still don't have a method for the thing to move. So this the cube itself wants to move and it knows where it wants to move to, but it doesn't know how to move there. So what we're going to create is another component up here at the top inside of the missile itself. So if we were to go back here, we would be looking for not the AI, but the actual blueprint, right? So double click into the blueprint, and here in add component, let's add a new component, and we're going to type in float, and what we're looking for is floating pawn movement. Okay, if we have floating pawn movement, if we click on it, we'll see over here in the details panel that what we get is things like acceleration, what's the max speed of the object, how fast does it go from 0 to full speed, does it do it instantaneously? If it was, let's say, if the max speed was, yeah, so it actually accelerates pretty fast right there. Deceleration, so as soon as it stops, like if we were to walk onto the mesh and then walk off and it started to move, how long would it take it to decelerate before it would it stop on a dime, or does it have to slow down? Turning boost, what that does is helps the object to move. So if the turning boost is low, it does more straight lines and angles. If the boost is high, then it's going to feel like more of a curve. You know, there's different things that we'll look at right here later, but we don't necessarily need to do anything with this right now. If you wanted to, I would maybe play around with some of the adjustments of the speeds, the acceleration, the deceleration, and the turning boost, but I would leave it at that for now. So once that's there, we can go ahead and hit compile and save, and we should be able to put one of these out on the floor. Okay. So now that we have one of these out on the floor, you'll see that this green area, that I have this green area and you do not have this green area. This green area is called a navigational mesh. And what a navigational mesh does is it gives a area for the AI to work inside of. So if we did not have this mesh, the AI and the blueprint would have almost everything that they need to be able to start moving around, other than where they can move, right? So if we look at the H missiles code, we'll see that we get the floating pawn movement, which is telling the pawn how fast and what acceleration and all that deceleration it can do, so how it's going to move. If we look at the AI, we get what is going to move, which is the pawn, and where it's going to move to, which is the player. But we don't have the area where it can move on, and that's going to be set inside the game. So that is the navigational mesh. So let me go ahead and delete mine, and we'll show you how you can add your own. Whoops, I don't want to delete what I just deleted. Okay, so now it's no longer there. So if I was to push play right now, we would see that I can walk up to these things, and even though almost everything is programmed, they are not moving. They'll react to that, and the other ones should respawn. They do. We haven't added the respawning to this yet, but they're not moving towards me because they don't have an area for them to move. So let's go ahead and add that navigational mesh. So to get to navigational mesh, what you need to do is be in modes, be in place, go underneath volumes, and if you scroll down about halfway, because it's in alphanumeric order, you will see navigational bounds volume. Now there's also a modifier one, and we'll talk about that one in just a minute. We'll actually have a whole video on navigational meshes and different ways and different strategies for getting different characters to work on them differently. But for right now, we just want to add one so then that way we can test to see if the missile is actually moving in the first place or not. So let's go ahead and add one. So I'm going to come here to Navigational Mesh Bounds Volume, add it to the area. I'm going to go ahead and expand this out to fit at least the area that I'm working in. And you should, if you don't see the green, it'll probably end up looking like this at first. You can come up here to the top where it says Show. And if you scroll down about halfway, there's an option that's called Navigation. And you'll see that the shortcut is the letter P. So if I click on this, we'll see that we get the green. Now, you may or may not be seeing the green still, and if you're not seeing the green still, what's probably happening is that your navigational mesh is not interacting with anything that it considers a surface. So right now we can see that it actually does not see anything that it can navigate. But if I move this down, you'll see now that I'm seeing the green. Now this also works across multiple levels, so you don't have to set up multiple meshes. And okay, so we'll get into what meshes are in a minute later. What I want you to see is that right now my character is outside the mesh. These guys are inside the navigational mesh, and we're going to push play and see what happens now. Okay, so being outside, they don't see me. Being inside, they now start to move towards me. One of them missed, so let's see what's going on with that. Sometimes you have to, especially when you add a new one in or something like that, let's move that one around. These two seem to be fine, so let's go ahead and push play. Okay, and we would have to see what's going on with this one. But we do have, and you know what we may just have to do is erase it and put another one in. So let me go back and find where those were. And let's move that up. Let's go ahead and push play one more time, see if we can't get that to work. Yep. So all I had to do is put another one in there, and now all of a sudden everything should be working the way it was supposed to be working. Okay, so fantastic. So now the only thing that we have not done yet is add the ability for my missile to respawn. In most cases, unlike the mine, the missile may be coming from some particular something that's maybe shooting at you. And if that's the case, you would expect it to have multiple missiles, or maybe it has the ability to shoot more than once. And if that's the case, you need this object to then respawn. So to get the respawning to work, what we want to do is go back into the blueprint for the H missile, and we'll wait for my autosave to finish. Okay, and what we'll need to do is add a additional pin. So if you don't have that additional pin, go ahead and click add. If you have too many of them, like I've just done, I'm going to remove one. So I'm going to click and drag out from the third pin, and I'm going to type in delay. Now the reason why I want to type in delay is because I actually want to offset the timing between when the missile is destroyed and when it respawns. So depending on how many of a certain type, maybe how many things you might be having shoot at something, at your character, you might reduce the time or increase the time. So this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have this go to a 5-second duration. So remember that this is, if it's 5.0, it's 5 seconds in length. And from there, we will, once the delay has been completed, we want to type in spawn, and we're looking for spawn AI from class. And this is actually a function that looks very similar to the one that's up here. This one is called spawn actor. This one is called spawn AI. So the spawn AI is actually going to, instead of spawning a blueprint, is actually going to, well, it's spawning a blueprint, but it's picking it from the class of things that we have. So if we scroll down here far enough, we will actually see homing missile, H missile, I think there it is, H missile 2. Don't worry about the behavior tree for now. The location is, we don't have actually a location right now, so we'll fill this in. So this is basically saying, where do you want it to respawn from? And so for me, I would assume that I want it to respawn in the same location that this one's at. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this one, and I'm going to look in its details panel, and I will see that I have an X, Y, and a Z coordinate for location. Now, if I click on the area, once I've got it selected like I do now, I can right click on it and say copy, and now I can go back to and fill this information out. Now, what I like to do with this is I actually like to right click on this and say split structure pin, and what that then does is puts my X, Y, and Z values independently. And now I can come in here and hit Control V, and then just, you know, select what I need for the X value. Okay, so now I know that that's my X value. I'll do the same thing here, hit Control V. Make sure that you leave the negative there, because that is part of the location. There's both a positive and a negative version of every X, Y, and Z coordinate. And that's the last one. Okay, so now I have this basically, it's going to wait 5 seconds, and after 5 seconds it's going to respawn the H missile 2, which is the one that we just created, and then it's going to respawn it at this location. So once we have this part, this is going to be the respawning part. So let's go ahead and hit compile and save, and let's go test. So we'll push play. And I don't even need to walk into the area. I'm just going to shoot and see if it respawns itself. And it does. Okay, fantastic. We'll test to see that it's actually moving. And now we have something that feels like a missile, looks like a missile, kind of. I'm sure that there's better meshes out there. But that gives us everything that we need to be able to test and make sure that the missile itself is moving, that it has the ability to be able to move, it's on a navigational mesh, and that all the code is working between the AI controller and the controlled pawn. Okay, so in the next video, what we're going to do is look at different navigational mesh systems, and how you can better control the movement of each one, maybe individual pawns, right? Okay, have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.